Hi everyone, Jeff Marion here. Welcome back to my YouTube channel where we talk about personal injury cases. For the past couple of weeks we've been focusing on opioid cases. We've been talking about how the opioid crisis happened in the first place, how these suits came into being, who the parties are, why we haven't seen a lot of personal injury cases, and we've also talked about how Purdue Pharmaceutical may be the largest bankruptcy in the history of the United States that arose out of this litigation. This is a series of videos that will help you navigate a personal injury lawsuit. It's not so much about the money as it is keeping you safe, keeping you healthy, and keeping you informed. So you can check out more information on my website, www.jeffmarionlaw.com, where I also have free PDFs on what's in a vaccine and why they're safe, and also the myths surrounding the COVID-19 vaccine. If you are interested in this subject, or you're interested in personal injury law as a whole, you can click on my logo in the corner to subscribe to the channel. You can also check out my website, www.jeffmarionlaw.com. Just so you know who I am, I've been fighting for people who've been injured in crashes and in falls and by unsafe products for over 25 years. I also filed the first suit by a town in New York State on behalf of the town of Amherst against the manufacturers and distributors of opioid pain medication. I am also a co-chair of the American Association for Justice's Opioids Litigation Group, which is the group of attorneys who are fighting these cases in court. So let's sum up here. So what we already know is that through a manipulation of the science led by Purdue Pharmaceutical, a privately owned company, opioids in the form of Oxycontin, oxycodone by different manufacturers, and various generic products became the go-to medication to be prescribed for pain relief. In order to do that, we had to take 100 years of science and stand it on its head and say that if these medications are given out as a prescription, they can't possibly be addictive. But we know that to be untrue. Also, if you remember, the easy availability of black tar heroin from Mexico compounded this addiction problem and created the public health crisis that we have been experiencing related to opioids. So initially, it was governments that fought back, whether that was state attorneys general, counties, cities, and towns that filed suits under the theory of public nuisance. And the theory of public nuisance is one that says, because of your actions, we have to have incurred costs that we wouldn't ordinarily have to incur. Also remember that you talk about false advertising, unfair business practices, unfair trade practices, fraud. Those are also alleged by these municipalities. We haven't seen individual plaintiffs filing their own suits because many attorneys focus group those cases and found that the mock jurors were just not interested in the cases at all, or interested in giving a recovery to that individual plaintiff, or they would divert their attention towards the doctors who were prescribing the pain medication. So in a public nuisance lawsuit, what are the damages? What these municipalities, your states, your counties, your towns are trying to get is an abatement of the nuisance. And what that is that's three components. It's going to be law enforcement, it's going to be education, and treatment. So what essentially these towns, counties, and states are looking for is money to create programs that help law enforcement resolve the street level problem, create therapeutic courts or other therapeutic methods so that people can shake off the addiction, and education, as simple as going into a senior center and telling people that that bottle of pills in your medicine chest is the same thing as a crack pipe. So that's really what these main plaintiffs are looking for. Compounding or complicating all this, is the bankruptcy of the largest manufacturer, the brand name manufacturer of Oxycontin and opioid pain medication, Purdue Pharmaceutical. By the time this video comes out, their plan under Chapter 11 of the Bankruptcy Code may already be in place and have potentially been voted on. So they are going to emerge from bankruptcy, but they're not going to emerge as Purdue Pharmaceutical. That company is going to cease to exist. The Sackler family are going to at least keep some of their wealth, but there will be payment not only for these entities that have filed lawsuits, whether they are governments, whether they are tribes, whether they are hospitals, but also there was a carve-out for individual plaintiffs. As long as that plaintiff filed a proof of claim by the end of July 2020, that claim can be considered, and there will probably be a small amount of settlement for those 130,000 claimants. So what should you be looking for as you follow this particular litigation? There's a couple of big bellwether trials coming up. In the Northern District of Ohio, where most of these cases are based, there are trials against the pharmacies and some of the distributors that are coming up, and you'll be seeing probably over the summer as COVID-19 restrictions release and jury trials start to happen again. Now, one of the big trials that's coming up is West Virginia is having their trial. It's Cabell County, which is ground zero for this opioid crisis, which includes the city of Huntington, West Virginia. Those cases are going to be tried at some point in the spring, and that's going to be, I think, an important indicator of what's going to happen with these cases going forward. The verdict out of that case is going to be very key. Something I think that bears monitoring, something you should keep an eye on. So also you want to see, how does the bankruptcy shake out? Who gets what, and how much do these various plaintiffs get in their cases? There'll be a lot more information about that as the bankruptcy plan moves into approval, and those certain carve-outs for municipalities for plaintiff's personal injury, individual plaintiff's personal injury, and all of that starts to run into place. So you really want to look at those particular issues. You want to see how that case in the Northern District of Ohio plays out, how the West Virginia case. New York State will even have their state case coming up, which involves 2 counties and the state's Attorney General case. That one is going to bear watching. So as you follow this particular issue in the news, look for those news stories to tell you where this litigation is going to be headed in the future. I hope you've enjoyed this series, and if you have been injured in a fall, in a crash, or by an unsafe product, please email me at the address below. Also, you can contact me through my Facebook page, www.facebook.com/JeffMarionLaw. So also, subscribe to this channel for more information about personal injury law as a whole. Like this video. Leave your comments in the section below, especially if you have questions or you want to see me cover a specific topic. I'll be happy to put together a video. And also check back here, videos come out every Sunday, and share it in your social media group. So until next time, stay safe and stay healthy, and we'll see you soon.